All right, let's see. Awesome. So let's see here. Go ahead and let me know you can hear me and see me. Because today I've got some amazing information for you today. So today, it's one of those things where I have a sex master that I work with, and his name is Dr. Lauren, right? Master Lauren. And one thing about Master Lauren and his sexual kung fu or whatever it is that he's doing, when gentlemen go through and work with Master Lauren, they're always in a different space. So here's the thing. In the throes of passion sometimes, between the stress of trying to make sure that you're pleasing the person and that you get pleased, between this whole conundrum of how's it going to go this time, I'm not really sure, the whole excitement of it, a lot can kind of go in different ways. So what we got to talk about today is a way that you can very quickly, clinical data shows this, real life example shows this, where you can very quickly increase blood flow and open up blood vessels to the majority of your body, and particularly to the erectile function area. So I think what we got to keep in mind here is that we always talk about nitric oxide. And we talk about nitric oxide in terms of blood flow, because when nitric oxide was actually invented, not invented, but discovered, the gentleman actually won a Nobel Peace Prize. So when you think about nitric oxide, I want you to think about nitric oxide as not only one of the key secrets to erectile function, I also want you to think about nitric oxide as one of the key functions to life. Because our heart must pump, everything, blood flow is related to life, to brain chemistry, to erectile function, to the heart, to everything. So what I want to do is show you the exact thing that you can do before the throes of passion, during the throes of passion, or even leading up to, that you can actually spend time increasing blood flow almost immediately. And I think you're going to be surprised, because some of you actually probably have already done this or already do this. And when you start to understand the chemistry behind it, then you're like, bam. All right, so let's get to it. So the first thing I want to do is just a brief review of nitric oxide, how it works, and why it's so important, right? So you know the basic pathway, and a lot of you may actually be on L-arginine or L-citrulline in an attempt to boost nitric oxide production. Because the interesting thing about nitric oxide is that you can't take a pill for it, you can't do anything like that, but what you can do is encourage your body to make as much of it as possible. So what we've gone through in previous videos, we've talked about how mouthwash can kill off your body's ability to make nitric oxide, right? We've also talked about how if you're blocking acid in your stomach and your esophagus, that can interfere with nitric oxide production. And we've also talked about how being on a diet that does not include nitrate-rich foods, how that can interfere with nitric oxide production. And then we've talked about it in a way where we've talked about how do we augment it, right? So the biggest way that we've talked about how to augment and increase nitric oxide production is what? Of course, green leafy vegetables and nitrate-rich foods, which my smoothie recipes of course are packed in, which are why so many guys have great results with them. So if we take it one step further, I want you to go away from here understanding that there's a part of your body where so much nitric oxide is produced that we never talk about, that you never hear anyone really tell you to focus on this area. And some of you are constantly in a flux with this area of your body, and it may be reflective on your ability to sustain and maintain erectile function. And I think it's going to blow your mind when you see how simple it is to kind of augment this area and to increase nitric oxide production. Now, the area that we're talking about today, study after study has been done, because when they first realized that this area could be where nitric oxide production is like skyrocketing, I think they were a little confused. They're like, well, wait a minute. How does this area have anything to do with blood flow? So just to kind of continue speaking about it, now if you have spent some time and you've taken my ED quiz, right? myedquiz.com, it basically gives you a detailed report as to where some deficiencies might lie, right? But what I want you to do is look at this picture here, and what you'll see is the lining of the blood vessel, right? The lining of the blood vessel is what we call the endothelium. So as we age, particularly after you hit the age of 40, the endothelium starts to not work as well as it did before. And as a result of that, something called nitric oxide synthase, NOS, you'll see it in that first slide there, actually starts to not be as effective. And we need nitric oxide synthase to make nitric oxide. So what we're depicting in this slide is basically the lining of the blood vessels are responsible for helping with the production of nitric oxide. And over time, as those blood vessels start to age, that NOS, or nitric oxide synthase, starts to work a little less. And as a result of it, we're not making as much nitric oxide as we should. Now, the interesting thing about nitric oxide is that nitric oxide is made and it disappears that quickly. It's made and it's disappeared. It's made and it's disappeared, and it's a gas. So when the nitric oxide synthase in the lining of your blood vessels isn't doing exactly what we want, the body is such an amazing thing that we have another area that is designed to make nitric oxide. And when they discovered that when you take a deep breath and breathe in through your nose and out through your nose, that you are releasing so much nitric oxide, they had to say, well, whoa, wait a minute. Why is there so much nitric oxide in the breath coming from the nose? Is it the nose? Is it the nasal passages? What in the world is happening here? But what is actually happening is that you see these little tiny cavities in your face. These are called nasal sinuses. And in the sinus passages, the same areas that give us trouble during hay fever season, the same area that you might get sinusitis or feel stuffy nose, particularly if you're taking some of these prescription medications that we give for erectile function, what happens is the lining of the sinus cavities are making tons of nitric oxide, believe it or not. They make enough nitric oxide that studies have been done where they have someone take deep breaths. They study people as they're taking deep breaths, and then they're actually studying the amount of nitric oxide as they exhale. But then they're taking it one step further to see if that nitric oxide is doing what we know it to do, which is signal the expansion of blood vessels so that blood can come rushing through to where it needs to go, right? So, okay, so I've blown your mind with the concept of the nasal passages and the sinuses. So what this means then, if you're taking Claritin, if you're taking Sudafed, if you have a sinus infection, if you've been relying on antibiotics for sinus infections chronically over time, you may have actually thrown this area off. Some of us are doing nasal sinus rinses to kind of rinse the passages. I mean, because when they actually look at the levels of nitric oxide, they can actually watch them decrease when these areas are occluded, right? So if you're a mouth breather, if you're snoring at night and you're breathing hot air out of your mouth instead of in through your nose and out, this is a big deal. That's why you see some people advocating for taping your mouth while you sleep. Because if you tape your mouth while you sleep, you're actually having oxygen bathe through the nasal sinuses, and you're actually producing nitric oxide, which is signaling your blood vessels to relax and rush through the blood. So that's one thing that you can do. And if you think about it, it makes sense, right? Think about the times where you've been so stressed out or just so, and you just take a deep breath in and out. You kind of instantly start to feel better, right? You actually almost instantly start to feel relaxed. So one thing that I noticed about Master Lauren and his teachings with sexual kung fu is that he always speaks about deep breathing. And guys always actually tend to improve with their erectile function. And so what we can hypothesize then is that a lot of the deep breathing through the nasal passages, the reason why it works to help advocate for stronger erections is because they're actually helping you make more nitric oxide, which is helping make blood flow. Now I'm going to take it one step further. There's one thing that you can actually do in the throes of passion and before the throes of passion, besides the deep nasal breathing, that can actually increase this process a little more. So I think what's interesting about science and what's interesting about our bodies is I think when God designed us, he basically made all of these other little areas so that if something doesn't go quite right, we've got another area of the body that might pick up on it, right? That might actually do a better job than we thought. So let's talk about this a little bit. So our goal is to increase blood flow everywhere. So increasing by nasal breathing, right? We're bringing the oxygen in. The nasal sinuses are actually helping create more nitric oxide, so more nitric oxide is released. And then when we get to the heart, when I want you to think about the heart, I want you to think how all this is connected. The red are the arteries. So the heart pumps blood away to where it needs to go. And the blue, those are the veins. So those are actually going to the heart, right? And so ultimately, we want our veins and our arteries to be as healthy as possible. So when we're thinking about it in terms of erectile function, what you also got to think about here is blood flow all the way here, which is a little further from the heart. And what can we do to increase blood vessel size even greater to have a better response? We call that vasodilation. So one thing that science tells us, now pay attention to this and I want you to try it and I want you to know that it makes sense. We get vasodilatation or the expansion of the blood vessels, guess what? When we hum. Okay, so I want you to think about this in terms of science, right? Think about this. So we know the sinus cavities are creating nitric oxide. And when we're actually humming and vibrating this area, what is it doing? It's causing that nitric oxide to be released at a greater capacity. So what I want you to try now is, and it makes sense, right? When you hear your partner kind of humming a little bit, making a little noise, both of you get turned on a little more, right? Now what I want you to try is I want you to be the noisemaker a little bit. So this is a kind of guttural type of humming. So it's going to be kind of like a, you kind of want to be vibrating your sinuses at the time. Take a deep breath in. And hum. Like that, right? It doesn't have to be anything super loud. You know, the neighbors aren't going to hear. No one's going to judge. But what it's actually going to do is turn your partner on a little more because we all love to look up and see somebody moaning in ecstasy. But what it's also going to do is cause you to have a surge in nitric oxide. And that nitric oxide can potentially cause dilation of the blood vessels and basically increase blood flow so that you can actually, have better results. So I think my camera is dying on me here. So what we're going to do is take a hiccup. I want you to know that the big thing is for you to hum. All right? I'm out.